Hi class, it's Professor Rourke. So I had a question regarding one of the problems from 1.5, which is solving quadratic equations. I know it can be a little bit overwhelming, and it'll be really helpful if we can feel confident about how to solve quadratic equations. It'll make everything else in this class a bit easier. So in that regard, the problem that I had and asked my instructor question on was number 23 from the section 1.5, my math lab homework. Okay, and for this particular question, it was actually multiple choice. And if you see the screen, it says that B is the correct answer, but I had some things sort of confused of like, okay, that's the correct answer, but how do I sort of get there? So I wanted to make sure that we were all sort of clear about how we have to solve some of these quadratic formula equations, especially in regards to like simplifying a radical if needed and things like that. Okay, so the question says, find the real solutions, if any, of the equation, use the quadratic formula. So just a little side note, if it says real equations, that means that they wouldn't want the solutions with an I in it for imaginary. We can have imaginary solutions. Sometimes in this section, they will just say like, find all possible solutions, and that would cover real and imaginary, but this one we just want real. So that kind of tells me I probably will not have a negative underneath the radical, or if I did, then there wouldn't be an answer at all. So we wouldn't have multiple choices questions. So there is an A question, like our answer A, which says -6 minus the square root of 57, all divided by 3. There's B, which says -6 minus the square root of 15 divided by 3. And also, sorry, -6 plus the square root of 15 divided by 3. They have these answers listed between commas. And different way would possibly be like, for instance, C says, has listed out as -12 minus the square root of 15 divided by 3, and similar, but with a plus. You could also have typed the answer in if there was an option to type it in or delete, record it, -12 plus or minus the square root of 15, all divided by 3. And then lastly, we have -6 minus the square root of 15, all divided by 6. So they're all very similar. If you sort of just look at through these, they're all, the answers are different ways of like sort of making common errors. Okay, so let's walk through this first, because most of these answers you would arrive at if you did the correct substitution for A, B, and C, and did a lot of the correct. It's just sort of the common issues are right at the end. Okay, so first things first, since the equation is 3x squared plus 12x equals -7, similar to factoring in quadratic formula, we always want to make sure it's equal to 0. Okay, so what I'll do first is I'll add 7 to both sides so that I can have 3x squared plus 12x plus 7 equals 0. Okay, and then I always recommend we just kind of keep track. A equals 3, B equals 12, and C equals 7. So everything here, all these values are positive, which kind of helps sometimes with some of the issues with the negatives, but still can be tricky. Okay. So the quadratic formula, again, is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So let's go ahead and start substituting the values, and maybe we can see where some of these possible issues might occur. So I'll go ahead and substitute for -b. B is 12, so -12 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 12 squared minus 4 times AC, so A is 3 and C is 7. So I have 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times 7 underneath my radical. And then this is all divided by 2 times A, which is 3. So 2 times 3. Okay, so I usually recommend you start with simplifying the inside of the radical first. So you can use a calculator for if you would like to, or if you want to try to go for it without a calculator, that's fine too. Sometimes the numbers are more like appealing than other times. So on the screen, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I would recommend entering to your calculator. Since there, again, are no negatives, I don't have to be quite as careful with how I type in 12 squared. Okay, so I don't need parentheses. You can always put parentheses around 12 if you'd like to, but it's really an issue when you have a negative there is the problem. Okay, so we have 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times 7. Okay, and that's where we get 60 from. So one issue, I think, sort of looking, it looks like maybe possibly if that went wrong somehow. They have one of the options is 57 on the inside of the radical, so that might have been an issue. So let's go ahead now and rewrite this. This is what I usually do. I simplify what negative b is. So it'd be negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 60. And then this is all divided by 6. Okay, so if you made it this far, that's great because it didn't screw up any like simplifications and things. But from here is where things can get a little bit challenging. Because we have to do two things. One thing we have to do is we have to make sure that we can simplify, if possible, the square root of 60. And then the other thing is there could be possibly like a sort of like a fraction operation simplification as well. Okay, so let's go off. I usually gonna go to the side to focus on what the square root of 60 would be. Okay, sort of just like you can put it on the side margin if you'd like to write it down. Just sort of something that usually can take its own little time off to the side to do. Okay, so the square root of 60, we have to think, is there any perfect square that divides into 60 evenly, right? And so there's a few different tactics that people like to do. Sometimes what I'll think originally is like, okay, 60 is even. Let me go ahead and just try to divide by 4 and see what I get. Okay, so when we do 60 divided by 4, you'll see that that is 15. Or maybe you already have that memorized, I'm not sure. So from there, what we do is we go ahead and break up the square root of 60 into the square root of 4 times the square root of 15, and then the square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so how we want to rewrite the square root of 60 is actually as 2 square root 15. So I'm going to go ahead and recopy my answer again and I have negative 12 plus or minus, instead of square root of 60, I put 2 square root of 15, and then again, divide by 2 times a, which we had was 6. Okay, so if we made it this far, that's great. I can kind of look through and maybe see where some of the possible other options would go. So if, again, a was like negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 3, I'm thinking if you got 57, maybe something kind of went astray with simplifying the inside of the radical, maybe a sign thing there. Okay. The other options, however, I can see where the issues would come as well. Like this part, the answer for part C is super similar to what we have right now, because we have negative 12 plus or minus 2 square root of 15 divided by 6. They have negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 15 divided by 3. So I'm thinking what would happen if you would have accidentally got that is maybe you like canceled out the 2 and the 6, but didn't realize that the 6 is also dividing the 12. So what I like to recommend you do here is to actually take once you've been able to simplify the radical, go ahead and rewrite your large fraction as 2 smaller fractions. Okay, I think in general, sometimes if students have a hard time sort of simplifying these fractions, sometimes rewriting them as 2 different ways helps. So once we do that, we can see, okay, well, actually negative 12 is divided by 6. Which would get us negative 2 plus or minus 2 divided by 6 would leave us with 3 square root of 15. Okay, so one option that would be completely acceptable on a answer key, if you were writing the answer, would be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 15 over 3. But you'll notice that's not how the answers are written, which I think could cause some of the confusion. So the one other option, instead of breaking it up into 2 different fractions, would be to pull out the greatest common factor from the numerator and the denominator and see if anything would cancel. Okay, it's very similar to what we just did. It's just that it keeps it inside of the same radical. So for instance, I see that in my numerator, I have negative 12 plus or minus 2 times square root of 15. So I just focus on the 12 and the 2. They each have a common factor of 2. So if I pull a 2 as a GCF to the front, then I have 2 parentheses, negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 15 divided by 6. And then from here, again, this is the other option. Instead of splitting it up into 2 fractions, you could see that, oh, well, actually, now I can cancel 2 and 6, because 2 divided by 2 is 1 and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that's where they would get the option that they're looking for, which is negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 15, all divisible by 3. So I hope that helped sort of explain things again, because of the way they have these answers written. They have it all inside of one fraction. I actually recommend that maybe you write it instead as like -2 plus or minus the square root of 15 divided by 3, but they're both completely equivalent. They're the same. And I did want to show you just another option of how you can possibly leave your answer as a one fraction together instead of two. Okay, so I hope this was helpful, but if there was anything that was confusing or maybe didn't make sense, just let me know and I can definitely help to clarify it. Okay, thanks class. You're having a good day. Take care.